Salutations, people! Welcome to Page 3 Killers, Murders That Went Unnoticed, a podcast where we dive into the murder cases that went unnoticed by our nation's newspapers. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Page 3 Killers, Murders That Went Unnoticed, Season 3, Episode 5, and this will be the part 2 of our 3-part series diving into the LA's Southside Slayer cases. So I'd like to take a moment right now to thank our patrons on Patreon before we get too far into this, because this episode is going to be pretty interesting. Thank you guys so much for sticking it out with us and tuning in every week and being part of our true crime community here at Page 3 Killers. A huge shout out to Stacey Fragale, Chelsea Hargrett, and Christy Bryson. Thank you guys so much for your donations. I truly appreciate it. Now, if you guys out there want to help support the podcast, not just with content ideas, likes, or shares, you guys can always donate on Patreon, and you can donate as little as $1 a month. But remember, you can always like, share, subscribe, which are free. So with that said, let's get the ball rolling on this episode. Now, as we discussed the last week or so, the Southside Slayer was the name given to who was originally thought to be a single killer and eventually turned out to be several killers that were active in Los Angeles between the 1980s and 1990s, who were responsible for upwards of 100 deaths of African American women in Los Angeles. So last week we discussed Louis Craine and Ivan Hill, and this week we are going to be focusing on Michael Hughes and Daniel Lee Siebert. This week we are going to start off by talking about Michael Hughes, who is a convicted American serial killer currently serving time on death row at the infamous San Quentin prison in California. He was originally sentenced to life without parole for the murder of 4 women and girls in California, and later his DNA was linked to a DNA profile found at the crime scene of other murdered women. It is thought that Michael Hughes committed at least one of the Southside Slayer killings, but he may in fact be related to more than just that one. What I do know is that he is linked to a total of 6 unrelated murders between 1986 and 1993, and is suspected of committing several additional murders. Now, it is possible that he committed murders in the states of Michigan and Maryland. Both are places in which he previously resided. Michael Herbert Hughes was born in 1958 in Michigan. Shortly after his birth, his father left the family, and when he was about 5 years old, his mother moved him and his sister to California, where they lived in Pasadena and Los Angeles. While living in Los Angeles, he attended the Los Angeles High School from 9th grade to 12th grade. And even with his father not being present in his life after his early childhood, his family was still quite dysfunctional. His mother was an alcoholic who regularly beat him and his sister. There was even one incident that really damaged his psyche, which would be an incident he described in detail at his trial regarding his sister and his mother. Now, his sister had become pregnant and his mother had aborted the baby herself in front of her son, apparently. So during his teen years, he was hospitalized numerous times for several nervous breakdowns that he had, probably mostly due to his mother's actions. Following that, in 1976, at the age of 17, he enlisted in the United States Navy, where he worked as a shipmate for several months and then was moved up to a gunner's mate. While he was serving in the Navy, he moved quite extensively, and some of the areas that Michael traveled to included Michigan, San Diego, Long Beach, and Frostburg, Maryland. Now, we have seen this before on this podcast when we've talked about serial killers with military backgrounds. We know that they quite often kill in the areas that they are stationed in. And in fact, the fact that they are in the military, leading a bit of a transient lifestyle, may actually help military personnel cover up crimes that they have committed and evade capture. After leaving the military, Michael Hughes did move back to California, where he mostly lived on the streets and sold drugs to make a living. Now, at that time, he did meet a group of people who became sort of like friends with him, and they too lived this transient lifestyle. With this group, he moved from Oakland to Long Beach and then finally settled back down in Los Angeles, where Michael Hughes eventually committed his first confirmed murder. During his first trial in December of 1993, Michael Hughes at the time was a security guard, and he was arrested in Culver City. So in 1998, he was convicted and given a life sentence without parole for the strangulation murder of 3 women: Teresa Ballard, Brenda Bradley, and Terry Miles, as well as a 4th person, Jamie Harrington. Now, Teresa Ballard was 26 years old and was found in Los Angeles Jesse Owens County Park on September 23rd of 1992. The other victims were found dumped in alleys in Culver City commercial areas. Brenda Bradley, at the time of her death, was 38 years old, and she was found on October 5th of 1992. Terry Miles was found on November 8th of 1993, and at the time of her death, she was 33 years old. The final victim, Jamie Harrington, was 29 years old, and she was found on November 14th of 1993. On July 3rd of 2008, Hughes was charged with sexually assaulting and strangling 2 women and 2 teenage girls in Los Angeles between 1986 and 1993. Now, this was all brought about by his DNA being linked by homicide detectives to DNA samples from the victims using the newest forensic DNA techniques. The first case would be that of Deanna Wilson, a 30-year-old woman who was found in a garage on August 30th, 1990. Later on at trial, her case was dropped from the charges but was used by prosecutors to establish Michael Hughes's pattern. The second victim would be that of 15-year-old Yvonne Coleman, who Michael Hughes killed on January 22nd of 1986. Now, her body was found in a park in Inglewood, California. The following two victims were killed in Los Angeles, and that would be the murder of Verna Williams and Deborah Jackson. On May 26th of 1986, Verna Williams, 36 years old at the time, was discovered in a stairwell. She was considered at the time to be a victim of the prolific, unidentified serial killer known as the Southside Slayer. The next victim was Deborah Jackson, who was found on June 25th of 1993. She was 32 years old at the time of her murder. Michael Hughes was eventually convicted in November of 2011 and sentenced to death in June of 2012 for the murder of Coleman, Williams, and McKinley. Now, Michael Hughes and his prosecution team did file a motion to have Michael's sentence reduced based on upsetting events from his early childhood. I believe that the incident they cited was namely the story of his mother aborting his sister's unborn child and the physical and emotional abuse that they had both suffered at the hands of their mother in their early childhood. Now, at this time, Michael is currently awaiting execution on death row at the San Quentin State Prison, which I feel is where he belongs, really. No. As of 2008, authorities suspected that he may have been involved in more killings than what he was convicted for, and are currently investigating him in several different places in the United States that he served in during the Navy. Now, those locations include Michigan, San Diego, Long Beach, and Maryland. All right, on to the next killer on the list, which would be Daniel Lee Siebert. Now, Daniel is an American serial killer currently sitting on Alabama's death row. He was convicted of 3 murders and has confessed to at least 5, with him indicating during his questioning that he was responsible for at least 12 deaths. It is believed that he committed at least one of the murders attributed to the Southside Slayer, which could be higher. Now, in addition, he was linked to a total of 9 unrelated murders across multiple states from 1979 to 1986, and it is suspected in 3 other deaths. Now, Daniel's first known murder took place in Las Vegas, Nevada, where he was convicted of manslaughter. Next, Daniel was charged with the 1985 murder of 2 women in Los Angeles, California. The following year, in 1986, he murdered a student and her 2 children at the Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind in Talladega, Alabama. Her name was Sherry Weathers. Sherry Weathers had been a student of the Alabama Institute for the Deaf and Blind, and when she had missed multiple classes for more than a week with a no-call, no-show, the school was worried that she had not contacted them with an explanation for the unexplained time off. A search of her apartment resulted in police finding her body along with that of her 2 children. During the investigation of Sherry's murder, another student from the institute was also found missing. Further investigation found that Linda Jarman had also been murdered, like Sherry, and found in her home. During the investigation into the murder of Sherry Weathers, police were notified that an art teacher using the name Daniel Spence had expressed interest in the young woman. He was questioned by police, who found him a bit suspicious, so they took down his fingerprints for comparison. Daniel Spence's fingerprints revealed that he was in fact not Daniel Spence, but Daniel Siebert, a man who had a previous conviction for manslaughter in 1979 and was wanted on assault charges in San Francisco. By the time the police had received confirmation of Daniel Siebert's identity, he was already in the wind and would remain on the run for the next 6 months. He was apprehended, though, in Hurricane Mills, Tennessee, after placing a phone call to a friend who reported it to the police. Now, the police put a tap on that friend's phone, and the next time that Daniel called, they were able to trace the phone call to a phone booth near a restaurant where he was working. The following day, he was arrested when he showed up for work. Now, Daniel was charged with the murder of Linda Odom, a waitress whom he had been dating at the time. She was reported missing in February, and her remains were discovered in March. Daniel's fingerprints were found in Linda's stolen car. Police also believed that Daniel Siebert was involved in the death of Cheryl Evans of Calhoun County, Alabama, whose body was found around the same time as Linda Odom. Daniel was charged with the death of Beatrice McDougal in Atlantic City, New Jersey in 1986. This case I was able to find some pretty interesting news articles for out of the New York Times. The article that I mainly looked at was the article from March 11th of 1986, and it was found in section B on page 4, which talked about the murder of Beatrice McDougal before it was actually solved. Now, Beatrice was a 57-year-old tour guide who was killed in room 434 at the Caesars Atlantic City Hotel and Casino on a busy Saturday night. The article noted that guest room 434 was kept unlocked so that tour guides could use it as a lounge and rest up in between completing their duties. Now, at 9 p.m., Beatrice's manager, Mr. Peters, received a call from the bus driver stating that Miss McDougal had not returned to where the bus would be departing from that night. Now, at the time, the bus driver was asked to wait a half hour before leaving without her. At this time, the bus driver, who was concerned, called the hotel security office and was told that they knew nothing about her whereabouts, so the bus left at 9:30 p.m. that evening. At 10 p.m., Mr. Peters received a call from the Atlantic City Police Department notifying him of the death of Beatrice. It is believed that Beatrice was strangled and stabbed inside of room 434 between 5:30 and 9:30 p.m. by an unknown assailant. Police noted that the motive at the time was unknown and that the autopsy determined strangulation as the cause of death. Beatrice was found fully clothed and her purse nearby. Police even hinted that her killer possibly used his bare hands to strangle Beatrice. At the time of her death, Beatrice had worked part-time for the last 8 months for the Wade Tours Inc. of Rotterdam, New York. As part of her job, she had been going to Caesars Hotel and Casino every Saturday as a tour escort for Wade patrons on one-day gambling trips. Tour escorts kept passengers entertained en route to the casino and hotel by leading them in sing-alongs and conducting bingo games and other games as well. 38 passengers that accompanied Beatrice on the bus ride that day were questioned by police in Coney, New York, the first stop on the return trip. Daniel Siebert was convicted in the capital case involving Linda Jarman and the case of Sherry Weathers and her children. His execution date was set for October 25th of 2007 for the murder of Sherry and her 2 children. The Assistant Attorney General Clay Crenshaw said Daniel Siebert had exhausted all of his appeals for the killings. Now, at the time of his death, Daniel was undergoing treatment for pancreatic cancer, and his execution was delayed just hours before it was to occur. But that did not mean that he was able to escape his fate. On April 22nd of 2008, Daniel Siebert died in Holman Prison at Atmore from complications of cancer. So that brings us to the close of this episode. And next week we will be back with our final 2 killers on the list. Probably 2 of the most well-known. At least one of them is very well-known. He ended up being dubbed the Grim Sleeper, which was a huge case that was brought to light in 2016. So we will be talking about that next week. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will talk to you guys next time. Bye, guys.